Hello, and welcome to this edition of People in Transition. I'm your host, Bob Gerst. I've been hiring and mentoring executives, frontline employees, and job seekers for nearly 40 years through a host of transitions, some difficult, but most very good. This experience has given me a bird's eye view on a variety of trends, economies, industry disruptors, and transitions, big and small. It also brought me into contact with the thought leaders and decision makers you need to meet. Imagine knowing exactly what to do next and how to know it's time to make your big job change. We all know transitions can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. And it's even fun when you have actionable strategies and proven tactics to achieve the future you want. We'll share with you the tools and skills that can take your dreams to your next great job. So if change is on your horizon, you won't want to miss this discussion. Also, please subscribe to this podcast so you won't miss any future episodes. Sindy Thomas, I am so pleased that we're together today. Ever since we first met on LinkedIn, I've been looking forward to this recording. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, Bob, you are so welcome. I'm very pleased to be able to be on your podcast and share my knowledge and experience with your listeners.
Sindy, when you were a child, what is it that you dreamed of being someday when you grew up?
Interesting question, Bob. When I was a child, the first thing I wanted to be was a hairdresser. Totally unrelated to what I ended up doing later in life. But that was probably because the hairdresser we used to go to was a real likable lady. Thought about being a hairdresser. But then I also thought about being a nun, too. So, I went to Catholic schools.
You covered all the bases there, let me tell you, right?
Yes. Absolutely.
And Sindy, what were the transition moments that you went through from that time as a child, seeing yourself as a nun hairdresser, to where you're at today?
Well, I've always been active. I was a very active child, always outside playing with my friends, playing, at school in the yard. And I was really good at sports. When I got to high school, I realized I was even better at sports and started playing a lot of team sports like volleyball, basketball, softball, anything that they had, pretty much I was like trying it out. So when I got to my senior year, I had prepared myself to be an executive admin. I had taken all of these typing classes. I'd taken shorthand. People don't even know what that is anymore. But I had taken those kinds of classes, and that was what I was going to do when I got out of school, was get a job and start working. One of my instructors, Sister Claudine, God bless her soul, she said, "What are you doing after graduation?" And I said, "Oh, I'm going to go to a JC." And she said, "Well, I think you ought to go to a four-year college." And I said, "Really?" And she gave me the application and encouraged me to fill it out. And I did, got into Cal State Hayward, which is where I studied here. That changed my life. I ended up majoring in kinesiology and physical education. I wanted to be a teacher. That was what I was going to do with that degree. But when I got to college, I had played sports, as you heard me say earlier. I got into dancing. And secretly in my little girl's heart, I wanted to be a ballerina. But I never expressed it to anyone. And so when I got to college, I could take as many dance classes as I wanted. And I ended up having more units in dance than anything else by the time I graduated. And I was so in love with it that I went to Mills College to work on a master's in dance. And that kind of changed the whole trajectory of my life. Those are some of the pivotal moments.
Sindy, I know that there are different types of recruiters. Maybe for our listeners, you can describe those different types and how best to work with each of them.
Yeah, there are 4 different types of recruiters. There are agency recruiters. There are corporate recruiters. Those are the recruiters that work on site in the company and for the company that they are recruiting for. There are recruiting consultants. They're fairly similar to the corporate recruiter. And then there are retained or search firm recruiters. So let's start with the agency recruiters. They work outside of the company the position that they're working on, they do it outside of the company. So they work with clients or companies on a contingency or a contracted basis. So if you're an agency, you see these positions. Sometimes the company contacts you, but a lot of times it's the other way around. And you see a position that you may have an expertise in. You may have clients or candidates that are fit for that, and you reach out to that company. And so let's say things go well, you end up getting a contract with them. So from there, you are able to submit candidates to that company. But if you don't have a contractual agreement with them, the company's not going to accept your candidates. So the agencies, a couple of the larger ones that most people have heard of are Kelly, Manpower, Randstad, Robert Half, those kinds of places. Those are agencies. They may do something else, like Robert Half may do retained search, but for the most part, they're an agency recruiter. Now, the pros of working with an agency recruiter is the same way they reached out to one client, they can reach out to several clients. So at any given time, they may have a host of positions, let's say 3 to 5 positions that they're working on with the same kind of title. What this means for you, if you're working with them, is they can get your resume in front of those different businesses. So that's a plus for you. Now, the downside of working with an agency recruiter is that a lot of times, as a corporate recruiter, you may have 3 or 4 agencies that you're working with on this particular position. So those 3 agencies have the same position that they're working on. That's the downside, that lots of other agencies may be working on that same position. What you need to know as a candidate is you need to try to keep as much control of your resume where it's being submitted as you can, which means do your best to find out who the client is. Now, a lot of times they don't want to tell you, but if you keep at them, they may give you an idea of who it is, because you don't want to be double and triple submitted to the same role. So that's a downside of working with an agency. And that was an insider's tip for all the listeners there about making sure that you are careful who you send your resume to. Now, let's talk about the in-house corporate recruiters. Now, this is the job that I did for 25 plus years and absolutely loved it. If you're a corporate recruiter, you're generally a FTE, which means a full-time employee of the company that you're recruiting for. But you can also be a recruiting consultant working on a contractual basis. Now, the thing to know for the recruiting consultant is they're only working for that one employer. So they're very similar. The only difference is one's full-time, the other one is contracted, but they operate in the same way. And so an in-house corporate recruiter is responsible for sourcing, recruiting, interviewing, handling the whole interview hire process. They're the ones that actually go and say, I need an agency recruiter to help me with this role because I don't either have the time or I'm not getting enough candidate flow. They'll sign up and get some agency recruiters to work with them. So they're very busy, these in-house corporate recruiters. They source, they screen, they qualify candidates, they manage all the resume review, they submit candidates to the hiring manager, they track the candidate's process, they update candidates on the status, and they're the in-house advocate for the candidate as well as the hiring manager and the company. They're in charge of organizing and coordinating the overall interview process. They manage agency recruiters working on the position. They manage the managers that they're working with, and they manage the candidates. And at any given time, they can be working on anywhere from 15 to 30 positions. So they're very busy because they're doing that same process for all those positions. Now, once the interview process is completed, they are the ones that make sure that the reference checks, the background checks, applications, drug tests, all of that are completed. And then they work with hiring managers to prepare offers, and they work with you if you're their candidate that you are in line with. What they don't do, different from agency recruiters, is they don't shop your resume around inside of the company. They hold on to their candidates and don't necessarily share so much with other recruiters. Sometimes it happens if you have a small team. Yeah, you can do that. But if you're working for a large company, there may be 30 recruiters. You can't possibly know what they're working on. So that's not something that they do. Now, recruiting consultants, they pretty much do everything the same as a corporate recruiter does. So let's talk about the retained and search firm recruiter. The recruiters with the search firm are retained, and that means that they're paid for the work that they're doing on a role, whether they fill it or not. And usually they work on higher level positions like senior director on up, but they can work on other management roles that are not at that level. The retained and search firms, they work directly in-house with the corporate recruiter as well. You can see how busy that in-house corporate recruiter is. So when you're working with a retained or a search firm recruiter, they're vetting you as a candidate. They're preparing you as a candidate. They put a lot of time in. They generally only present maybe one or two candidates. They don't over-present candidates to the company because they want you to choose. They've done their due diligence, and they want you to choose from the candidates that they've sent you. And that's pretty much what the differences are between those different recruiters.
And a key, I think, that many people get confused, a retained search firm individual is working for the company, not for the candidate.
Right.
You know, Sindy, in your 25 years, you've probably seen lots of candidates shoot themselves in the foot. What can a candidate do to avoid that accident?
I think the biggest thing is you can do everything right, but if you're not telling the truth or being upfront about your experience, and we find out later, that's going to be a big deal. Because being untruthful about your experience and not being truthful on your application form is reason to either be fired or to be knocked out of the process. That's the biggest. The other way that I've seen candidates shoot themselves in the foot is that they are not prepared for the interview. You have to do your due diligence and prepare yourself the best way that you can from the knowledge that you have for each and every interview, which means you're doing your research. You get generally you get an interview schedule of who you're going to be interviewing with. You should do your research on LinkedIn with those people, look at their background, learn a little bit about them. You do your research on the company so that you're not just going in there not knowing what the company does. You spend time on the company's website, finding out what they're doing. What are their products? What are the products that they have in development? Look at their financial pages. See where they are with their funding. How long have they been in business? See if you can find individuals on LinkedIn that you can possibly talk to about the company, or check your own network and maybe you know some other people. That's doing your due diligence.
Sindy, so many of today's interviews, at least the initial ones, are done via Zoom or some other virtual manner. How can you improve your skills in that area?
Well, you prepare for a virtual interview the same way that you prepare for an on-site interview. You take it seriously, but there are other things to consider. So after you've done your research and you've looked at each interviewer, you've looked at them on LinkedIn and you know a little bit about them, maybe you try to incorporate that into your interview when you're speaking to them. Other things that you need to do just from the interview standpoint and not the technical side of things, which I'll share a few things about that, but there are a lot more. Get your selling points and the reasons that you want the job written down. And you can practice it. Now, they shouldn't worry about sounding rehearsed because very often in a high pressure situation, you kind of lose what all that rehearsal was, but you still have the main things that you want to remember. So practice it, and your communication skills are a key skill that all the recruiters are looking for. Adobe did a study a couple of years ago asking recruiters what was the number one skill that they looked for in interviews, and it's communication skills. You have to be able to share what you can bring to the table. Share what your skills are, your experiences, and don't just say, I'm a great programmer. Give hard, solid examples of how you use that skill. Because what that does is it builds credibility while you are sharing about that in your interview with the people that you're speaking to. So it backs up. It's thinking about showing versus telling. Now, one of the things I have not shared with you yet is, maybe about 15 years ago, I decided, because I used to be a teacher and I love children, that I wanted to write children's books. So I spent a lot of time learning about the genre of writing children's books. And I have written a couple of children's books, but I have not finished. I finished one, but I haven't finished the novel that I was writing. But one of the things that they teach you is to show, not tell. And so that's what you want to do in your interview. You can very subtly show by saying how you did something versus just saying, I have great computer skills.
Sindy, you've talked before about the 9 secret techniques to improve your career pivot or in your job search. Can you take a couple of those and explain what you mean by that?
Before we move on to that, I want to just share one more thing about the virtual interviews. It's when you are interviewing with representatives of the company, the team, whatever, but you are representing you. So you treat yourself as the CEO and you do your due diligence to find out everything you possibly can. And so it's up to you to plan the strategy that you want for that interview. Think about the things that you want to get out of the interview aren't in the job description that maybe the recruiter didn't tell you. Find out more about the team. Find out more about the manager. Find out more about what their particular projects are for the year. Those are things that only you can find out in an interview, and it's up to you to ask those questions. Speaking about pivoting, I did do a podcast that has 9 steps, but I'm only going to share a couple of them. So the first is you have to assess yourself and figure out where you are. And you should make a list of the tasks and responsibilities that you like and you don't like about the job that you're in, your past jobs. Second, you should think about the work experience and the skills that you've gained along the way that would be useful, or what we call transferable. Transferable just means that you're taking that same skill from one job to another. Third, figure out what your work-related values are. Now, these are elements that you already know that are important to you. These are things like having a flexible work schedule, maybe working day shift, working remotely, whether or not this job is going to give you some job security, what are the benefits, those kinds of things, or maybe even the job title. And an insider's tip that is about the fourth one, which is aptitude. Now, aptitude is a capacity to acquire competence or skill through training. If you have a specific aptitude, maybe you're a good artist, whatever the form of art is. Maybe you have a good mathematical aptitude, or maybe you're just good with computers and software and all of that. A general aptitude means that you have the ability to basically learn in several different fields. So an insider's tip for the listeners is we have aptitudes about a lot of different things, but just because you're good at something doesn't necessarily mean that you want to do it 40 hours a day. So know that if you have an aptitude for something, you don't have to get locked into it. It may just be an element of a role that you are applying for, and that may be okay for you, or maybe not. But think about that too. Don't just think about what I'm good at. Do I really want to do it? And then next, you need to write down your hard and soft skills too. So they're very important in today's market. Hard skills have always been important. We know how to interview for hard skills because it's easy. Can you pass this test? Can you use a computer? But the soft skills are becoming more and more important. And those are things like your communication skills that we talked about earlier, whether or not you're a good team player, whether or not you have emotional intelligence. Do you know how to manage your time? Are you detail-oriented? Can you problem solve? That's been a big one the last couple of years. Are you adaptable? Do you want to learn? And are you creative? These are all soft skills that are important in today's market.
Sindy, why do you think you should have a tracking document or instrument for the applications that you file and the contacts you make?
We live in the age of technology. And, years ago, people used to have to type something up on a word processor, or even if you go farther back, on a typewriter. You had to do it each time for each position you applied to. These days, you just go to the website or you go to the job posting and you upload your resume. You do that enough times in a day, you'll forget where you applied. And then when someone calls you, you're like, when did I apply? What is the name of the position? You want to always sound like you know who you've applied for and that you're on top of it. It helps you sound more intelligent when you are contacted for a role that you've applied for, but it also prevents you from double and triple applying to the same roles. You need to keep track of where you apply. And it can be something as simple as a handwritten sheet of paper somewhere. It can be an Excel spreadsheet. It can be as simple or as complicated as you want to make it. But you need to do it because it's only going to help you in the long run.
Why do you think you should write down your personal accomplishments, and what do you do with that information?
Well, one, it'll make you feel better about yourself, especially if you are in a job search because you've been laid off, the business closed, whatever the reason you are now looking for work. It helps you keep your positivity up to remember the good things that you have done, the things that you have accomplished. That's one reason. The other reason is when an employer or an employer representative, such as a corporate recruiter, looks at your resume, they are looking not just to see that you have the basic skills that they're looking for. They're also looking for, and the manager's looking for this as well, to see a progression, advancement of skills and experience. It can be promotion. It can be just learning experiences. You want to make sure that you show that on your resume so that when I look at it, if I'm the recruiter at the company that you applied to, that I can see, and especially if you've been at a position for a number of years, you don't want to appear as if you've just been doing the same thing for 5 years. You want to show in that 5 years, you've taken the role, you've learned the role, you've mastered the role, and then you've expanded those skills so that you're even more valuable than you were before when you first took the role.
Sindy, what do you think it means when people say failure is a part of the job search process?
Well, it is. I wouldn't say it's failure. It's just not getting that job. So here's my philosophy about job search. You apply to different roles. There is a specific and great spot for you, and you will not get the other positions that you apply to until you find the right one. So some people look at that as failure. It's just an exercise in the process of looking for work. It's not necessarily failing. It just means that maybe that role was not the right one for you, or you weren't the right one for it.
Yeah, I probably recast that line. I think rejection is a part of the job search process. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to get that rejection because we tend to take it very personal, as opposed to saying, the job was just not right for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You may find out later somehow that how true that was, that just wasn't the right role for you. Yeah, it's not really failure. You're just working on finding the right role for you. And if you know what you're looking for, you can more easily recognize it when you see it.
The job search process has stress associated with it, emotional, sometimes even physical. Mm-hmm. How can you better deal with that stress?
You can look for inspiration to help you deal with stress. It's all the relaxation techniques that we hear about all the time: exercising, meditating, doing deep breathing, doing hobbies that we like, yoga. All of that stuff helps you tune into yourself. You're operating on a different plane, and it does help lower your blood pressure and heart rate. Other ways to manage your stress are to adhere to a schedule, which is, you go to bed the same time, you get up the same time, which is really hard for people because you have to be disciplined to do that, especially if you're not going to a job every day and you have to be there at a specific time. But I have always purported that looking for a job is a job in itself. And the way that I like to tell clients to look at it is, you are looking for work You may not do it every day. You have to give yourself a few days off. Maybe you look for work Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You know how many hours you're going to devote to it. And you take Tuesday and Thursday and you do those other things. You don't necessarily want to do it every day because it becomes a grind and you do start to feel like you're a failure. You have to balance it out. That breathing exercise, breathing is a simple thing you can do anywhere, anytime. You can just do some deep breathing exercises, and that will lower your heart rate. It will eventually lower your blood pressure, and you'll just feel so much better. Most people won't want to hear this, but you manage your diet. You eat good food. Eating a lot of chemically processed foods is not good for you, and it causes stress in your body. Like I said before, you're going to schedule that work day. Plan your daily schedule so you can get in the things that you need to get done and work on the highest priorities first, and try to limit the number of distractions that you have. You can schedule, email pops up, we tend to go there, but you can give yourself a certain amount of time or a certain time during the day to go through email so that you're not continually going back and forth between two things. They say that whole word multitasking. You remember that, Bob?
Yes.
Yeah. Multitasking is a myth because it means that you're working on a lot of different things. You don't necessarily finish something. You want to dedicate yourself to something and see it through and then move on to the next task and the next task so you can get through to completion rather than trying to do 15 things at once and then feel like nothing got accomplished. And then talk to yourself in a healthy way. One of my, because I post on LinkedIn every day, the one I posted today was, I will be gentle with myself. I will be gentle with myself, and it repeats that. And it's being kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up. Other people will gladly do that for you. Talk to yourself in a positive manner. Be kind to yourself. And then laugh. Laughter is very healing. And I remember seeing this years ago about laughter, that they show funny things, funny movies, skits, whatever, to people in the hospital. It helps them heal. Laughter is very good. You can de-stress. It can help you heal, decreases your stress hormones, and increases immune cells and infection-fighting antibodies. So it works against depression and anxiety, increases your happiness. It's a great thing. So try to laugh more.
Yeah, and I might add to that list, surround yourself with positive, supportive
Absolutely.
people as opposed to those that want to tear you down, right?
Absolutely.
Any books or other resources that you would recommend to our listeners?
Sure. There's one I think that would be really good because especially now with the way that things have happened with COVID, a lot of those networking events are not happening. So learning how to network again. And it's called Networking is Not Working. It's a book by Derek Coburn. And he really breaks down a lot of the things that people do wrong with regard to networking. There's a philosophy that some people have that you go into a room of people, you speak to as many people as you can, you get as many business cards as you can, and you walk out and I networked with all these people. But that's not the best way to do it. The best way is to make a connection, talk to people, learn about them, find out why they're there, what they're doing, what their business is. Find out how you can help them. That's networking. And then share about yourself and really take that network connection to heart and stay in contact with them. Don't just try to use them for a connection to get into a company, but also return the favor. And that's more than networking, it's building a relationship.
Yeah, in my networking class, I say networking is more about giving than taking. Sindy, if our listeners remember 3 things from our discussion today, what are those 3 things you want them to take away?
I would say that be honest in your job search when you're speaking about yourself, your skills. Know what your skills and abilities are and be able to articulate that in an interview in a way that shows you in a positive manner and also brings the puzzle pieces together for the interviewers so that they don't have to try to put the pieces together. You put it together for them and share that with them. You can do that by sharing solid examples and then saying, that's what you bring to the table. That's how you can help them. And then the third thing I would say is to keep developing yourself, keep learning, keep growing. Don't stay stagnant. Always be learning and doing something.
Sindy, when we first connected, I knew that this was going to be a very value-packed and interesting discussion, and you achieved that and did even more. Thank you so much for being with us on this episode of People in Transition.
Oh, you're so welcome, Bob. I would like to share that I do have a career podcast that the listeners might be willing or wanting to hear more about. It is called the Insiders Career Club Podcast, and you can find it on all the major podcast hosting sites like Amazon, Google, Podcaster, iHeartRadio, all of those places. But you can also listen to the podcasts on my website, which is the same name. It's Insiders with an S, careerclub.com. And you can find more of these resources about pivoting, about virtual interviews. There are sheets that they can download there under job search, tip sheets, and get some other information. And they can also sign up for coaching with me.
I've listened to the podcast and I've been to the website, and I recommend them both. So, Sindy, thank you once again.
You are so welcome. It's been my pleasure. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you for listening. We're working in unprecedented times. The purpose of these episodes is to give you the support and critical tools to adjust with the changing marketplace. I'll continue to introduce you to guests who have successfully survived their own obstacle course and can share useful information. If today's message was helpful to you, please share it on your social media. Your review and rating helps get this to more people. Also, if you have questions or podcast ideas for future conversations, reach out to me on LinkedIn. Change is constant. The more prepared you are for it, the better and easier the change will occur. Thank you again. This is your host, Bob Gerst. See you at our next episode.